She checked her seams before she left the house. Not once, twice. Because a crooked stocking line on a Tuesday morning could cost her more than she knew. It is somewhere around 1955. The alarm has already rung. The coffee is already cold, and in a modest bedroom in a city like Chicago or Detroit or any American town humming with postwar optimism, a young woman is standing in front of a mirror making calculations that no one will ever acknowledge. The 1950s expected women in the office to adhere to a strict and formal look, with stiletto heels, dresses, and stockings as essential components of professional life. But this was never written on a wall or spelled out in a contract. It lived instead in glances, in the slow, sweeping look a supervisor would give from the doorway, in the way a coworker's eyes moved before moving away. Fashion in the 1950s emphasized conformity. Women were sold on a specific silhouette, a thin waist defined hips, a shapely bust. Corsets, controllers, and latex slimmers were heavily marketed as standard beauty fare. Getting dressed for work meant getting dressed for scrutiny. She pulls on her nylon stockings carefully, smoothing each one against her leg. They are not cheap. They will not be replaced easily. She clips them to her garter belt, steps into her A-line skirt, navy blue, pressed the night before, buttons her blouse to the collar and slides into her low heels. She puts on lipstick, not because she wants to, because not wearing it would be noticed, and noticing in that office was never neutral. She arrives at the building a few minutes early. This too is a calculation. Bosses openly commented on female employees' appearances, clothing, and bodies without any fear of consequences. Arriving late invited that commentary. Arriving early gave her a chance to settle in before the men did, to be already useful, already invisible in the right way. In 1950, women constituted 33.9% of the labor force in the United States, numbering about 18.5 million. Career options were limited. Women found employment primarily as teachers, nurses, secretaries, and factory workers. For most of them, the office was the ceiling, not the floor. She sits at her desk, a small one, near the door in a row with the other women. The typewriter is already loaded with a fresh sheet of paper. The telephone is already ringing. She answers it on the second ring, not the first. First rings, she had learned, seemed too eager. And eagerness in a woman was a complicated thing. The morning unfolds in a rhythm she knows by heart. She types letters she did not compose. She schedules meetings she will not attend. She takes notes in a room full of men who will present those notes as their own thinking. Women often worked for considerably less money than men and were subjected to frequent sexual harassment and exploitation. There were no human resources departments. There were no formal complaint procedures. There were only the unspoken calculations she made every hour about when to smile, how to decline, and how to make a refusal sound like something else entirely. She refills the coffee. She does not wait to be asked. She already knows what happens to women who wait. Lunchtime was the hour that belonged to her, or almost. She ate with the other women, usually in a small room off the main floor, or at the counter of the diner across the street. They talked in low, careful voices about the commute, about the cost of things, rarely about ambition. Ambition in a woman required a very specific kind of armor, and not everyone had it yet. Some of them did have it quietly. Those who were more highly educated secured jobs in emerging fields such as engineering and pharmaceutical science. A small number were pushing into spaces that had never belonged to them. But for every woman who managed to hold a professional title, there were dozens who had been steered away from the door before they could knock. Employers often refused to hire qualified women, or would only offer them jobs traditionally considered women's work, such as secretarial positions. Many colleges had quotas
limiting the number of female students they would accept. The path was narrow before it even began, and there was something else, something she carried like a stone in her coat pocket. If she married, she might lose her job. Marriage bars were policies adopted by firms and local school boards to fire single women when they married and not to hire married women. At their height, these policies affected more than 50% of all office workers.
So she kept her personal life compressed into a small, careful shape. She did not mention the man she was seeing. She did not wear her engagement ring until she had another plan in place. She knew women who had given notice on a Friday and been back at their parents' house by the following Monday. Lunchtime ended. She walked back across the street, checking her seams again in the glass of the revolving door. The office emptied slowly in the evenings. The men left first, most of them.
Then, one by one, the women gathered their things, their compact, their gloves, the small purse that held the bus fare home. She had another hour of work before she could leave. Not because anyone had asked her to stay, but because leaving precisely at 5, she had learned, was interpreted as a lack of dedication.
And a woman without dedication had very little left to argue with. No laws prevented employers from firing female employees if they married or got pregnant, or from refusing to hire married women, or women whom they did not consider attractive. The lack of legal protection meant that every day was a negotiation conducted entirely on the employer's terms.
She could be let go for reasons that were never spoken aloud, and there would be no appeal, no recourse, no record. Women who complained about harassment were fired or labeled as troublemakers who couldn't take a joke. So the jokes continued. The comments continued. The hand on the shoulder held a beat too long continued, and she learned to keep moving, to stay in motion so that nothing could quite land on her and stay. At home, if she lived alone, she made dinner for one and pressed her skirt for tomorrow. Growing numbers of women in this period were seeking psychiatric help only to be dismissed with unhelpful suggestions. The pressure was real, even when it was invisible. The loneliness was real, even in a crowded office.
And the quiet anger that lived beneath the careful smile. That was real too, though it had no name yet and no place to go. But she came back the next morning. That, perhaps, was the most extraordinary thing of all. Take a moment to consider what it meant to walk into a building every day, knowing that the rules were designed for someone else, that your salary was lower by design,
That your future inside those walls had a ceiling so low you could press your palm against it. The Equal Pay Act would not be passed until 1963. The belief that women of the middle and upper classes should never enter the workforce had allowed the legal exclusion of married women from many professions for decades. The working woman of the 1950s existed in the space between two worlds, one that told her to stay home and another that needed her labor but refused to reward it equally. During the 1950s, the trend began to turn. Women started returning to the workplace in greater numbers and became increasingly involved in state, local, and federal government service. The change was slow, and it was rarely celebrated in real time.
It was happening in bus seats and lunch counters and typing pools, in the quiet accumulation of women who showed up and refused, in their own careful way, to disappear. In 1957, a company called Kelly Girls rose to prominence for supplying temporary office help. By 1962, the number of these temporary female employees has surpassed 60,000. Women were filling America's offices from coast to coast, answering its phones, typing its correspondence, managing its calendars, and being paid a fraction of what the men around them earned for the privilege. It took the Equal Pay Act of 1963. It took Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It took the entire arc of the women's movement that came after, with its marches and its lawsuits and its books. Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique in 1963 and named what so many women had been quietly living. The dissatisfaction behind the pressed skirt, the slow suffocation behind the perfect smile. The book resonated with a whole generation of American women trapped in a perceived suburban bliss and was later credited with igniting the second wave of feminism in the United States. Much has changed since then.
Women now hold leadership positions in law, medicine, government, and business. Protections exist that did not exist before. The name on the door is no longer always a man's. And yet, the seam checking still happens in different forms. The calculation of how much space to take up, how direct to be, how much to want, these are not ancient history. They are Tuesday mornings even now. She carried all of it forward. That woman in the navy skirt, with the careful lipstick and the cold coffee.
She didn't know she was building something. She thought she was just surviving. But survival done by enough women for enough years has a way of becoming change. The rules were never written down, but neither was the courage it took to keep showing up anyway. Do you have a suggestion for the next video? Share it with me in the comments. I'd be happy to bring it to life.